Welcome to Finance and Future Tech Podcast. We get to air this Monday and Thursday. That is 8 p.m. East African time on EJAZ Radio, and that's EJAZ Radio. That is Monday and Thursdays 8 p.m. East African time. You can check that with your local listings as far as time goes. But if you miss any of the podcasts, or you tune in late for that matter, there's always the podcast available on demand for you to be able to check out any of the episodes, or if you want to re-listen back to the episode, still it's available on podcast apps of choice. All you have to do is search for Finance and Future Tech podcast, and you'll be able to access that. So my name is Mark, and today on the show we are talking all things AI. We're going to get into how this works, what it is, and we are going to try to understand different ways in which we can use AI and the benefits of even deciding to adopt that in our everyday life, or some of the things that we get to do as far as work goes. So today on the show we have Essa, and he'll be talking to us about AI. But first, please welcome to the show. Introduce yourself and talk to us about what it is that you do.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And AI is one of those topics where you can wake me up in the middle of the night and I won't be able to stop talking about it. So we're going to have some fun today. So my name is Essa Mohamed Ali. A lot of people do call me Essa as well because of the spelling. Both are fine, to be honest. I manage and run an AI community called the Tanzania AI Community. And what we focus on is building the local AI ecosystem. And what this means is we work in a few areas at the same time, including advocacy and awareness, building content to create more awareness, working with policy and regulators to build policy frameworks, policies, strategies, and such. We do capacity building and training from both a technical point of view and a non-technical point of view. By that, I mean, if we say technical, we mean coding, building out the actual technology. By a non-technical, we mean conceptual thinking and design. If I want to build an AI solution, how would I think about it? How would I know if this problem can be solved by AI? And then beyond that, we do what we call applied research, where we identify potential sectors or avenues that could benefit from artificial intelligence, and we build prototype solutions that could be implemented and used in that space. But the underlying foundation of the community is bringing together the enthusiasts and practitioners in the country, in the continent, and building support mechanisms for them to build solutions that are useful and impactful for the local person. How can we build solutions that are useful for Tanzanians, for Africans, and potentially globally? That's the ethos and mandate of the Tanzania AI community that I manage.
And that's great. So you talked about designing solutions, and also versus looking at what is available within the area, whether it's because it's different for in developing countries versus where it's for the mostly developed countries. So when you look at, for example, the case of Africa, if someone is listening in now, what would be the potential benefits of adopting AI, and how would that help them in whatever they are working on? For example, when you look at the solutions that the community creates, how would this help them?
So first, we need to take into account that currently there are two types of solutions that we can talk about. They're the ready off-the-shelf type solutions that you can directly try to integrate in your business processes. And the second type is custom-based solutions that you're building to solve a very particular problem in your business. For off-the-shelf, a good example is something like ChatGPT. There is an existing model and system that's been made. It's being used widely globally. People understand how to interact with it and how to work with it. And there's an opportunity to customize it based on your individual needs. And this, of course, we're looking at it from a business point of view, where you're trying to integrate it within an existing portfolio or product offering. Of course, then there's always the consumer direction, which is just as an individual using this for my day to day to support that. But for now, we'll put that aside. Um, so with these types of off the shelf solutions, it makes it a lot more straightforward and quicker to adopt. Because when we start talking about AI, there are certain complexities that come into play that we'll talk about. A lot of people have heard about the data problem. Everyone wants data. So aspects like that. But with an off-the-shelf solution, most of that hard work has been done. And it's a matter of customizing the solution towards your specific requirements and needs and integrating it directly. For example, can I build a customer support chatbot based on internal documentation and FAQ so that when people have questions or needs, they don't need to wait for a human representative. They're able to get immediate response from the chatbot. And in case that chatbot is then not able to respond to a satisfactory level, it can be escalated to a human, a responder. So it's that kind of thinking. And then we come to the second part, which is where there is significantly more value, but in the long term, and it will take some time to unlock that value, which is building custom solutions based on custom requirements. For example, I'm serving a particular client space. Let's say, because we're on a financial podcast as well, let's say we're looking at loans and we want to identify which of our customers would be the best to offer a line of credit for a particular good. So we would want to first collect all the data to look at who are our best customers that are taking large enough quantities and are very timely with their payments or have shown no history of defaulting or anything. Can we use that to build a system or a model that can tell us which potential customers can be offered a line of credit and how large of a line of credit can be offered based on their order quantities, based on their frequency of orders, based on the buying power they have and the customer base they serve. So this is a much more custom model for a very specific situation and will change based on the goods and services being offered. And in the long term, it can unlock a lot more potential because if you as a business are able to offer a line of credit to your customers, they're more likely to come back to you and more customers will be interested in working with you. But to reach that stage requires the data history of already having worked with these people, requires the understanding of these dynamics. What are factors that are going to affect their purchasing power, their credit worthiness, etc.? And do we have the technical capacity to build this kind of model and integrate it? So there are these dynamics that start to come into play with more custom, bespoke solutions.
Yeah, and still speaking of developing solutions specifically, which is the second part, which is interesting because you really need to have data to actually make some design something specific. So when we look at, for example, the healthcare or education or even agriculture, uh, how can AI, right? And this is mostly going to be more in what it can be rather than what it's already doing because we are still in the process of having these solutions designed and implemented. How can AI, for example, be used to improve access to better and essential services, for example, in the healthcare sector, education, or even agriculture?
Sure. So first, these are what I like to define as impact sectors. They're ones that impact nations and countries, but on the flip side, what that typically means, especially in a continent like Africa, is these are sectors that are very hard to commercialize in and have sustainable business models in. But we can come back to that discussion later. So when it looks at these impact sectors, then it's all about what is the potential the technology has to be more efficient, because a good way to think about artificial intelligence is it's personalized efficiency at scale. So if we look at the industrial revolutions, for example, we start to see that there's a trend on how at the beginning, every good and service that was created was very bespoke. It was created for a specific individual. Eventually, we moved to mass manufacturing because we realized that it's because of economies of scales and things like that, it's a lot easier and cheaper to build at scale. But what that means is we can't do personalization anymore. Like I believe the saying from Ford was you can have the car in any color as long as that color is black.
Yeah.
That's mass manufacturing. There is no personalization. But as we're getting into the age of information and digital, we're unlocking personalization at scale. The reason I give this long intro is because then we can start thinking of it as we are able to use the technology to provide very specific personalized services to a large number of individuals at a scale at which a typical human wouldn't be able to do. So if we think of agriculture, we can give specific information to a specific farmer based on their specific location and conditions and plantations and all of that. And that advice is fine tuned to them. And that is something that's enabled by this kind of technology. So when we think of it like that, is where we start unlocking the possibilities. Healthcare. We're looking at everything from designer drugs, which means medication for a specific individual based on their DNA and gene makeup. So, medicine that might work for you might not be as effective for me, and there might be something more effective for me. Understanding what that is, doing personalized healthcare. If I know your entire family history, your entire illness history, it makes it a lot easier for me to be able to give you specific diagnostics. The issue we face now is that there's always a shortage of good, high quality doctors, of good, high quality teachers. That same quality of that one math teacher, science teacher that we remember fondly, if we could get that quality of teacher for all subjects available in the most rural of areas, that is what is being unlocked with a lot of these solutions in the impact sectors. So in education, we're looking at personalized learning. Can you learn on your own in such a way that it identifies the challenges you face in that specific subject, in your understanding or the application of the theory or the content, and provide you with specific exercises that support your learning growth in that direction? There's some interesting experiments that were going on in China, especially in education, on different ways to use AI in education. And one method was either it's a support tool for teachers to help them teach the content better by identifying which students are doing good, which require a bit more personal time, and how to find that balance. The other direction was let all theoretical content be handled by the AI, and the teachers are focused on human skills, on behavioral skills, on socializing, on communication, on the soft skills, while the technical knowledge and all of that is handled by the system. So these are the kinds of solutions that we're seeing in these different sectors. And then the more you get into it, the more interesting things you can find. The reason that I give a thinking rather than specific solutions is because we don't always know all of the possibilities of how it can be used yet. There will be people coming in with novel ideas to say, hey, why don't we try doing this? Why don't we try letting a chatbot give career guidance or an AI give career guidance and a career path? There'll be interesting new solutions that are coming out. So I like the frame of thinking rather than specific solutions.
Yeah, and mostly I think we get caught up in creating the solution rather than looking at what the environment is and what can easily, how can we enable the solution work rather than only focusing on designing the solution. Which brings us to another thing. For example, we talked about when we are looking at this and looking at mostly in developing countries, what are some of like, for example, with AI, there's more of the ethical question, which is you have issues like the data privacy, and then you have the algorithmic bias that comes with that. So, how can, for example, in the community, when you're working on solutions and trying to find a way, a better a step forward to be able to implement some of the solutions that may come up in the community. How are you approaching that issue?
So first is recognizing where does all this bias come from. The thing we need to remember about AI is we shouldn't anthropomorphize it. I believe that's the word, which means we shouldn't think of AI as an independent living entity in
Yeah.
of itself. It's That's not what it is right now. It is not its own thing. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have self-governance. It can't direct itself. We are still building it. And the way we build it right now is a very data-driven approach. And the more data I have, the more it can learn and the more specific it can get. That's a general rule of thumb. Um, so the more data I have, the more impactful and useful the solution can be, which is where it starts coming to odds with privacy, because I want more data, but from a privacy point of view, I don't want all that data. So that's the first thing. There are methods that are in place that are trying to find a balance, which is asking the question of what truly is the data that I need to be able to build a solution. Do I need to know the gender of a person? Do I need to know their racial identity? Does this really make the solution better? If we can remove those forms of identifiers that are potential sources of bias, that could make the solution less biased while still preserving privacy at the same time. The second issue around algorithmic bias is because all of this is coming from data. What is data? Data at this point is more or less the digital footprint of human decisions.
Yes.
That's what our data we're using is. And what we start to quickly learn is that humans are biased, whether implicit or explicit. We are biased. I will see an accident on the road or a bad driver, and the first thing in my head is, was that a woman?
Yeah.
I don't want to think that, but I will think that. It is an implicit bias that I have recognized happens. And there are always those kinds of things that happen. Sometimes you'll talk to your parents about a certain friend or situation, and for some reason they'll assume your friend is a guy, for example. It's one of those implicit biases, and those biases drive our decisions, whether we realize it or not. So, once we recognize that bias is directly embedded in human conscious and experience, we all have our different lenses of viewing the world, and those lenses have been made by our collective experiences, and that is our bias. Once we recognize that, it's a matter of asking, in this particular situation where I'm collecting the data, what are potential human biases that are in place that could have affected the outcome of this situation? Because when we as people make a decision, we do not make purely analytical decisions. We make decisions based on instincts, based on emotion, based on understanding, based on past experience, based on the mood of the day. There are a lot of different factors, but an algorithm is purely logical algorithmic. And if it learned something from the data, that for some reason that decision was made because of an emotional decision, it doesn't understand that. It will just find the pattern, pick it up, and replicate it. It says, oh, this is the pattern. So let's just use that pattern. So in our process of building solutions, we typically have to ask ourselves, what are potential points of bias from the data we're collecting? When these people were making this decision, what situations were they in that could have potentially caused some of this bias? And being able to understand that is what then makes it easier to find ways to mitigate or reduce that bias. That's not to say bias isn't useful. There are certain situations where we're trying to build solutions that are reflective of the scenario on ground. And because of that, there are certain types of bias that we would need to have reflected purely so that the solution is actually representative of the environment we're deploying it in.
Yes, absolutely. And earlier on, you talked about how, for example, AI is used in the education sector, for example, in Asia, right, in China, and how they were trying to see the patterns within the. Uh, how can the partnerships with the outside world and, for example, the collaborations and partnerships within people that have already done a step ahead of seeing how it works and implemented certain solutions. How can that help us when you, or even, for example, in your community, how can that help when you're making solutions? And what is the importance of even using those partnerships and collaborations?
So typically it's experience. By having gone through that process, you can learn to avoid certain mistakes before they even happen. The thing we need to be very careful about is that in that partnership, we don't end up being the consumer. We want to learn how to build. We don't want to be there just receiving and implementing. We want to be able to build the solutions for ourselves. Because remember how we've talked about this technology being specific and personalized and for scale and all that. A solution built in Asia or the global north or the Americas will not be useful for us because the context is different. It's been personalized for their demographic. It's not been personalized for our demographic. And there's simple examples of this kind of thing. Like whenever we use these virtual backgrounds of either Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, anytime we use these virtual backgrounds, we'll notice that on certain people, they work a lot better than others.
Yeah.
These solutions haven't been personalized and customized. It's a significant issue. And it's not, sometimes it's not always about something like the skin tone. Sometimes it can be as something as simple as the fact that in America, most people have an iPhone. The cameras on an iPhone are a different story. Here, most people have Technos and Infinixes. Using those cameras is a different story altogether.
Yeah.
So then those kinds of dynamics that also come into play. Um, so the collaboration, we have networks and systems that have been set up to encourage this collaboration. For example, we are part of a global network of an AI research center under the auspices of UNESCO. And they've set up a global network of AI center of excellences across the world where we look at research that's being done in different places, where we try and bring together work that's happening across the globe, do knowledge exchange and that kind of thing that's going on. So it's about how do we leverage the work that's happening in a win-win situation where we are learning the skills we need, but we are still actively contributing. We don't want to continue the what's a good word to use that won't get me into problems? I was going to say we don't want to continue the beggar mentality where
Yeah.
we just want to receive. We're not here to just receive. We want to be able to contribute as well.
Yes.
So it's finding that balance of identifying how can we learn but still contribute back. We're not here just to keep on receiving grants and money and solutions, and people are like, oh, Africa, poor Africa, here you go. No, we want to contribute on the global stage, and people to be able to look at us and go, there is value there. There are people building solutions that can help us here.
Yeah, and another thing that maybe the last part that we will have to tackle is the role of policymakers, right? How can they, for example, in developing countries, as much as we are developing solutions and people within the innovation space are advancing and getting to you create better solutions for some of the problems within the countries, within the developing countries, especially on the African continent, are facing. We have to bring along the policymakers because that's with the area within which you have to operate. So how can policymakers make an environment that is suitable for people that are creating these innovative solutions?
So the first thing is we need to stop blaming policymakers for not understanding, for not knowing what's going on. They are dealing with a lot. They're dealing with a lot, and they don't always know what's happening in these small bubbles and communities that are coming up. The first thing we need to do is raise awareness with policymakers to show them the good that is happening. What are the solutions that are being built that are supporting them in their agendas? Because they already have certain agendas that they're driving towards in agriculture, education, whatever sector they're dealing with. We need to show them how are these solutions supporting that journey, because the reality of AI is it's expensive. It's very expensive. The human capital required, the skills required, the infrastructure required, especially if we want to host these things on our own, it's very expensive. And for that investment to come through means we need to build a strong enough case for that to happen. So we need to really have them understand and show them value that we are providing within their existing agenda. Once they understand what's happening and they buy into the idea, then the conversation becomes a lot easier. Because typically, from a regulator point of view, what we've seen is if you talk to someone about something they don't understand, their first reaction will be to shut it down, put a stop to everything until we understand. If we do not understand, we will try to control it. Once we understand, we can start putting things into place that creates that conducive environment and ecosystem for growth. So that's the first step. From there, then it becomes a lot easier to look at what are the foundations required for that investment and which priorities do they want to start with: infrastructure, capital, human capital, the policy side, specifically intellectual property regulations, data privacy and protection, and a lot of different areas. At the end of the day, policy to me is building a conducive environment that allows more benefits from the solutions than harm. We're trying to reduce the amount of harm that technology can cause and increase the benefits and potential for it to contribute to the country's overall growth. So once we start thinking of it like that, instead of just blaming the policymakers and such, and look at how can we involve them in some of the things we're doing to help them understand, or for us to understand what is it like to build a policy. We've had the opportunity of being involved in certain policy creation processes, and it is a process. Just going through it, and especially trying to find that unique balance of what works for my country, for my unique situation. It's a balancing act, and a lot of technologists don't know what it's like to be involved in that process. So understanding from both sides will really take us further.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the best con- I would say contributions to as far as policy goes, because most of the time the mentality within the innovative space is that we tend to carry along. Once again, remember how you talked about the bias of, oh, politicians don't know what this is, they just don't feel like we are creating a solution that helps, so it's better to not have to discuss this. But then at the end, you get caught up in regulation when you want to implement some of the solutions. And then it comes back to, oh, they don't know what we are doing. And then they also don't have communication from this side. Then they make policies in isolation of what your contribution could have been. And then at the end, it's not helping anybody. But the Finance and Future Tech podcast, we get to discuss finance, of course, and what is happening in the world of technology and what it could be, which is why it's called the Finance and Future Tech podcast. I think this has been a great introduction of what AI is and what it does. I would like definitely have you on again. Then we start looking at some of the ways it has been implemented within mostly on the African continent, and some of the challenges that have are going on, and how probably they are being rectified and improved in certain areas. Maybe we can do that in the subsequent episodes if you're down with that.
Of course, happy to. Like I said, AI is one of those subjects I won't shut up about the moment you get me started.
Yeah. So, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. I'm looking forward to more episodes and what more awareness and content we can create.
Yeah, absolutely. The Finance and Future Tech podcast, wherever you get podcasts, but catch us live on eJazz Radio. That is Monday and Thursdays. That's when we get to discuss that live on the show. and that's at radio.ijazug.com.